Saskatoon City Council recently voted to become a so-called safe city for people in the queer community. This comes at a time when we're seeing trans rights being stripped away in the United States. Transgender people make up less than 1% of the U.S. population, but they've become a political pawn for Donald Trump. He's erased the mention of transgender people on U.S. government websites and passports. Here in Canada, specifically in our own province, we aren't without our own issues. The government's development of Bill 137, the active pronoun policy in Saskatchewan schools, has been criticized as discriminatory to trans youth. Issues of safety and visibility in the trans community are never cut and dry. Egal Canada says visibility is a balancing act, and to be safely visible is a privilege. Our guests today know that more than anyone. We are marking the Trans Day of Visibility, and today we're going to hear from members of Saskatchewan's trans community. We'll learn about what's done to make this province a safer place for trans and two-spirit people, and we'll learn about the importance of making space to celebrate trans joy. If you have thoughts you'd like to add to the conversation today, please email us, bluesky@cbc.ca. So, some quick background in case people are wondering where this day came from. It goes back to 2009. Its founder, Rachel Crandall-Crocker, is a psychotherapist in Michigan. And at that time, the only holiday that Rachel knew of geared toward trans people was the Transgender Day of Remembrance. And that day is November 20th. It's dedicated to honoring the lives lost to anti-transgender violence. And Rachel wanted a reason to come together and to feel joy. So let's do that today, but also let's get some perspective. We have a powerhouse panel with us today. Blake Tate is co-chair of Saskatoon Pride. He is joining us on the line from Saskatoon. Welcome to Blue Sky. You're not on the line.
Thanks for having me.
You're in Saskatoon studio. You're not on the line. But thanks for being here. In our Regina studio, I'm joined by Jay Skelton and Bridget O'Brien. Jay is an assistant professor of queer studies in education at the University of Regina. Jay, welcome to Blue Sky.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And Bridget O'Brien is the new executive director of the UR Pride Center for Sexuality and Gender Diversity. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, before we go too far, I want to thank all of you for being part of the show. Not everyone in the trans community is comfortable being visible, and for some very good reasons. So I want to get to know each of you a little bit. Tell us who you are and why you do the work that you do. Jay, I'll start with you.
Thank you. So my work is significantly about gender diversity in education and ways we can find places to celebrate and welcome and make room for more gendered possibilities. All of us have a gender. Gender binary identities impact all of us. In fact, when I talk to a class of people and I say, have you ever been given a gendered expectation that doesn't fit for you? So maybe you've been told you should do certain chores or like certain things or want to wear certain clothing and thought, oh, no, thank you. That's saying that the gender binary is harmful to you. And that's more so for most trans people. And we've made changes to live in ways that feel better for ourselves and more true to who we are.
Was it always that way for you? Or is this something that's evolved over time?
I would say that how people perceive us is always complicated and always changes and changes in different places. And that in lots of ways, we give a little more room to children before puberty. So I got to have a childhood where I got Sunny and Laddie, which felt pretty comfortable. And that we often expect people to conform more to gender stereotypes through adolescence. And that's hard for a lot of us. And for a lot of us, I really mean all humans. A lot of us don't like how that goes. And that coming into who I am as an adult took work because I didn't have a lot of visible trans people in my world to look to and say, oh yeah, maybe I'm like that. I like the Trans Day of Visibility in terms of thinking about possibility models, which is Laverne Cox's language. But I would also agree with you that there are risks to visibility and that not all of us can weather those risks. I also would say that not all of us get to choose visibility. Some of us simply are visible all the time and really would like to have more invisibility.
That's fair. Can I ask you how old you were when you came out, when you put a label on your visibility?
So I'm chuckling slightly because I think we have this idea that people come out and it's like, ta-da,
Oh,
that's
yes.
happened. And I want to say coming out takes time and is a process. And lots of us make choices about where we feel we can come out safely at different points. And so for me, coming out to myself was before coming out more publicly.
Oh, of course.
That took time. And at this point, I'm very out in all parts of my life, but that's been a journey from adolescence probably through into my mid-20s.
Okay.
And people still make strategic choices around, is this the right place to come out, yes or no? And I will say, I really appreciate having a job where I can be out, where I can talk about what it's like to be trans in education in Saskatchewan in this moment, because that feels important. And I know there's lots of folks who don't feel like they have that ability.
Bridget, what's your story?
Well, that's a question and a half.
This is not a therapy session.
Damn it. You asked a lot of really good questions to Jay that I honestly wish you'd asked me.
Well, that's what same questions to you, right?
Okay, but if I could remember them, then I'd answer them. So,
what do you do, the work that you do?
Okay, so, right, exactly. So, Jay, you talked about wanting more invisibility. And that would apply to me. I don't want to be this visible. I don't want to have to fight this fight that I am fighting now. I had been horribly mistreated by the medical systems that I had tried to engage over the course of my transition, and very few other institutions were of any help in. I mean, we just weren't visible. We, So now I've been sort of fighting back a panic attack for the past hour and a half or so, being here and being on and being this exactly visible across a province that's been unequivocally hostile towards me personally through its policies. I came out to my parents in 1994 in a small town on the east coast of Canada, and it did not go well.
That was more than 30 years ago.
That was more than 30 years ago. Yeah.
How long did it take you to psych yourself up to talk to your parents about it?
Geez. I mean, well, that was more than 30 years ago. How could I possibly remember? I think it took me a couple of months. And one of the things that made it so easy for me was I had been told throughout my young life that I could go to them with anything. I could tell them anything. And honestly, I thought they'd be happy for me for having struggled with this, because I had struggled with it for about 3 years. And coming through and understanding, hey, there is a thing that I am. It's not just weird. Yeah, that's incredibly vulnerable. Next question.
How did you find yourself into the work? Because you have that moment with your parents that doesn't go well.
Right.
And you go through a transition and
Yeah.
you become the adult that you are today. And you could have chosen to be less visible. How did you find yourself as an executive director of a Pride organization? How did you say, I want to do this, I want to put my hand up for this job?
Oh, well, I mean...
Or are you now questioning your job?
It's very tempting to say I didn't, even though I did everything I could to get the job, and I was pleased as punch to get an interview even. Pleased as punch is an expression I just used. But it's very tempting to say that I didn't actually. Like, I didn't want to have to do that, but I have to do this because I can't let policies go back to what they were. I mean, these were de facto medical policies that that stood in my way for about 15 years, right? People have the impression that, oh, you come out as trans, and then there's about a year to a year and a half transition. You get hormones, you change your clothes, you get surgery, and it's over. It's done. 15 years.
Why do you think people have that perception of that it's just this easy path to from point A to point B, and these are the steps that you check off and onward you go? Why do you think there's that perception?
To be honest, I haven't given it much thought, but there is a cynical piece of me that says it's because they've never had any trouble with anything in their lives.
That's fair.
You know, They've never been outside. They've never been marginalized. They've never really had to think about who they are. And I think that's part of the hostility generally, is that the existence of trans folk and the visible, ready existence of us forces people to reconsider who it is they are in the context of what they've grown up with and what they've come to believe and how they're an adult and who they want to be in the world. And you know, I was talking to someone today about student organizing at U of R, and this is not a problem specific to U of R. I've been at SFU too, Simon Fraser University on the West Coast, and she said it's so difficult to get the students to organize, and I realized at that moment, well, that's because they've never had the impression that they could. Right? Everything has been taken out of their hands, and they've been dictated to how this is going to work. This is how you are educated. And then suddenly, it's in their hands, and they don't know what to do with it. And I think that a lot of people just don't know what to do with it.
Okay, Blake, I have not forgot about you in Saskatoon.
Hi.
Tell me about who you are and the work that you do.
Yeah, coming from a very different place, I think, than our other two panelists. I've been doing the work the past 6 or 7 years. I was on the Saskatoon Pride Board moving back before that. I was the Youth and Outreach Coordinator for the Trans Umbrella Foundation in 2018. Then on the Pride Board in 2019, 2020, and then running YXC Drag Collective from 2021 to 2022, and then doing some protesty things, and now back on the Pride Board since 2023.
Some protesty things, hey?
So just sort of all around in the queer scene, but
when did you get involved?
Things, yeah.
How old were you when you started getting involved?
I mean, in high school, I started and ran my high school's GSA, so that would have been 2014 when I was 14 years old. And I was sort of constantly at Out Saskatoon as a young queer person. So I think I've been involved pretty well since I've been living as myself. And I think for me in that, I was outed at 14, and then it was not a great time at home. And so, like, being in queer spaces and being around queer folks became an escape for me and became, like, the sort of refuge. And so I do the work now because I know that there's people that need that refuge. And I have the space in myself and, like, the sort of space in my headspace and emotionally to be doing the work for others, to have that space of refuge.
Who outed you, Blake?
I was a guidance counselor at school.
So you've been through kind of what's been going on with Bill 137 in a really personal way.
100% I have. And so I hold a lot of anger towards Bill 137 because it is my upbringing. And it sucks to watch my sort of rough life be legislated Like I turned to alcohol, I turned to drugs, I was kicked out at 18. I would have been homeless if I didn't have friends that gave me couches to sleep on. So it's important to me that we are still talking about it, even it's been going 2 years now, and we still need to be talking about it.
When you started that GSA in 2014, what was your motivation behind it?
Well, I mean, my school did not have a lot of openly queer kids. As far as I knew when I was 14, it was me and one other kid. And we built this space of visibility for ourselves within the school. And through that, found more community. So it was nice to be able to hold sort of this special little space for us in the school where, like, we wouldn't be getting called horrible, awful things. And also, like, other kids felt safe to come and say, this is me, but I'm not telling anyone else because I see the way you folks get treated. All you dyed-haired weirdos get treated a very different way than, like, the blonde cheerleader who is bisexual. And so, like, giving her space to have community while also being able to hold our community and see the different levels of our community was really nice.
Bridget, you laughed when he said the blonde cheerleader that's bisexual. Why do you think there's such a different acceptance for that? I don't want to call it a trope, but it's a movie trope.
Well, I wouldn't exactly call it acceptance. I'd say it was more a fetishization of a femininity that is oversexed, and because bisexual, which is not how bisexuals
Operate.
Thank you. Like, there's a lot of poor understandings of even bisexuality. And like, the cheerleader is just another part of that objectification, because the cheerleader is classically, tropically, the object of desire for the football player, right? So it's not. It looks more like acceptance on the outside, but it comes with a lot of expectations.
Blake, before we move on, I want to check in with David for headlines in just a second here, but we talked with Jay and with Bridget about visibility. How do you feel about being visible?
I've come to accept being as visible as I am. I never really expected to be this visible, and I don't think I would have chosen to be so visible, but I do also take this responsibility of being so visible very seriously, and I'm glad that it's me and not someone else. Like, I would rather take the weight that comes with it than put it on someone else, because I know it's a lot, and I think we all know it's a lot, and so I'm glad to be visible, but also don't think that I would have chosen it.
Jay?
I just want to add a quick note on GSAs. And so we're thinking about gender and sexuality alliances, or student groups in schools. And Blake, I want to say I'm listening to you describe starting yours and thinking about all of the research that says GSAs make schools safer, even for students who don't come to the GSA. And so there's lots of climate research that says knowing that the school has one makes 2S, LGBTQIA plus students feel safer, even if they never come in that room. And to really say it's important that we don't just let students do this work alone. And so I hear you as a student coming forward and saying we need a GSA, and I want to really value that and think it's so important people supported you in that. But also, it doesn't remove the responsibility from schools to make our climate safer. And absolutely, that's the work of the adults in the building.
Mm-hmm. No, not putting it on the kids. who are still figuring themselves out, right?
Well, and who deserve safety when they walk in the door. In fact, when they get to the school grounds, not because they've asked for a GSA, but because they deserve safety, like period, end of sentence. And so as you describe transphobic and homophobic comments, which I absolutely know happen in all of our schools. And again, we have research that says this is endemic. This is not just your school climate. It's essential that we're specifically addressing that and responding to that. And all of these are things that legislation in Saskatchewan has made harder.
I would like to bring in another perspective. Indigenous Teachers for Two-Spirit Youth is a new network that supports Indigenous educators, parents, and allies. Maddie Enns is a member of the group, and they are on the line now. Hi, Maddie.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for making some time over your noon hour. Why was ITSE, or Indigenous Teachers for Two-Spirit Youth, created?
Technically, the main reason we started was because our founder, Tansy Janvier, they were doing a research project in school, and it was in response to Bill 137. And as they were doing their research, they kind of realized that there aren't really any organizations in Canada that are specifically Indigenous and queer and are, guided towards students and helping support educators support their students. So they were originally going to do a letter writing campaign, and then just kind of realized how important all of this work is and decided to start an organization instead, and found a few people to join. And so, we've been around for basically a year now, and it's going pretty good.
What does it mean to be Two-Spirit?
For sure. So I guess that can really depend on the nation that you're speaking with, or who you're talking to. Everyone, in some ways, I'm sure, has their own interpretation as Indigenous people and queer people. Often, Two-Spirit is in reference to your gender or sexual identity. A lot of people see it as someone who identifies as having both male and female spirits. Some people see it as having neither, which is where, non-binary people may fall if they are Indigenous. The term Two-Spirit is strictly a term for Indigenous people. So not, just anyone who's in the queer community would necessarily claim that term. Additionally, a lot of times, Two-Spirit people in our communities, we traditionally had pretty significant roles, which is part of why colonization was so devastating for us, and especially for the Two-Spirit and queer community for Indigenous people. A lot of times, Two-Spirit people were seen as being leaders or healers, also seers or medicine people, knowledge keepers, storytellers, and more. So someone who identifies as Two-Spirit could fall under a lot of those categories, but generally is a part of the queer community in some way or in multiple ways.
So you're a new organization, but you're already providing support and resources. Tell me about the work that you guys are doing.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the big things that we've been doing is we've been providing newsletters every season. So we just released our winter one not too long ago, and a lot of that is, our organization as a whole is kind of geared towards people best supporting Two-Spirit individuals. That can also kind of encompass the queer community and just in general students and their safety. I think if Two-Spirit people are safe, then everyone is probably going to be safe, because we're some of the most vulnerable groups in Canada. So we provide a newsletter that's kind of geared towards teachers or parents, social workers, anyone working with youth. It's kind of geared towards them and not specifically towards the students. And we provide newsletters, we attend community events, we do things like go on the news. We did a podcast a while ago, and we'll be speaking at the STF conference on May 9th. And I believe we'll be doing another conference before the beginning of the school year. Just trying to provide as much information as we can, and understanding and also building community as queer and Indigenous teachers. I think sometimes it can be a little isolating working with youth, because you're not around a lot of adults all the time, which I love, but it can also, it can be isolating, and especially if you're Indigenous and if you're queer, and if you're both, then there's not a lot of spaces for us. So I think also having that community has been pretty awesome as well.
One of the resources in the newsletter was medicine bundles for sexual health. What's in that, and what kind of response have you seen from Indigenous youth?
Yeah, so the medicine bundle, it was through the CBRC. They were doing a research project, and they're providing free medicine bundles for any Indigenous Canadians. Doesn't matter the age. You can be Métis, First Nations, or Inuit. And yeah, they're pretty awesome. I received one, and it came with a few different things. I know a few people that have received medicine bundles, and we didn't always get the exact same things, but typically it would be, different types of medicines, including, cedar, sage, tobacco, sweetgrass. I got some tea in mine. A lot of people got bear grease, which is super awesome for a lot of different skin conditions. I also got a few different salves as well for, different skin stuff. And then they included some, sexual health resources, including HIV home testing kits, which I think is really, really useful because home testing kits aren't easy to come by. I've definitely ordered extra so I can take them to my workplace for the youth I work with. And they included, condoms, both external and internal, and lube, that type of thing. And also just the bundle itself is honestly really beautiful, the material that it's made of, and, everything coming in together. It's like a holistic approach to sexual health, which I think is great. And yeah, I've seen a few youth that I work with order them as well, and they really appreciated it. And it kind of helps bridge that understanding that, sexual health can be approached in a holistic way. It doesn't have to be so clinical, because that's a lot of reasons why some of us get kind of turned away and don't feel safe in those spaces. So yeah, I think I have friends that are much older than me that have ordered them. I know people that are much younger that have ordered them, and all of them found a lot of benefit. And yeah, getting a free medicine bundle with all that awesome stuff in it, just to answer a few questions and help them with their research project, is a pretty great deal, in my opinion.
No kidding. Recently, there was a Two-Spirit powwow held in Saskatoon. Why are specific events like that important?
Well, I think it's the same reason why organizations like ours are important. I think having spaces that are for Two-Spirit people and for Indigenous and queer people at the same time is something that we unfortunately don't see very much. We've had 2 annual powwows so far. So the last year's was the first year, and I was lucky enough to attend both. And that's one of the first times I've been in a space that was specifically dedicated to, Indigenous and queer people. And so, yeah, I think it just kind of helps in some ways even just reaffirm our identity and understand that we're not alone, and just building community. I know for us, it's been a great opportunity to kind of grow our following and get people to sign up for our newsletter and just know who we are. So yeah, I think it's just so useful, especially for the youth. It makes such a big difference kind of having those safe spaces.
Maddie, why did you want to get involved? We're talking about visibility today, and you could have chosen to be, I don't want to say invisible because you're a human being, you're not invisible, but you've put yourself in a public position. What made you want to get involved and do this kind of work?
I will be transparent. I am not the most, visible person when I'm just out and about. People can't always tell I'm queer. People can't always even tell I'm Indigenous. So that's been, an interesting journey to navigate, but I also understand that, I have a lot of privilege in that position. But I think it's still important. And I think, there's so many people involved, and a lot of times, unfortunately, when it comes to things like truth and reconciliation or any of those, efforts where a lot of times marginalized people are having to, do all the work. Of course, I still fall under those identities, but I also, have some privileges, and it's something that I'm, passionate about. I went through the SUNTEP program, where I got to learn a lot more about my culture and kind of connect a lot more. Growing up in Saskatoon, I didn't always have access to what I do now. So just kind of reconnecting to that part of it more and strengthening that bond and being involved in the community is really important to me. So being involved in this is just kind of a perfect fit, and the main organizer, we're pretty good friends, and we ever since they started the organization, we've been talking about it and going back and forth on our different ideas. So it just kind of came naturally, to be honest, and it's just kind of worked out that with my schedule, all of the times that I've volunteered for our organization, it just works out really perfectly. So it just kind of feels like the right path to be on, and it definitely feels like very important work that is very needed at this time, especially.
Maddie, if someone's listening right now, how did they get in touch with your organization? How do they find you?
So we got our social media. We have Facebook and Instagram is kind of mainly where you can find us, and then you can sign up for our newsletter. So it's just called Indigenous Teachers for Two-Spirit Youth. And then, we have a link tree on there where you can, we have a buy me a coffee section if you feel like donating, but no pressure. It's all, like the newsletter is free. So and then you can subscribe, and the newsletter only comes out once every season. So you're not going to get too much spam or anything. But we're mostly online. We don't have we're still pretty new, so we don't have a building or anything yet, but one day we'll get there.
Well, thank you for making some time for us and for adding to the conversation today. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Maddie Enns is a member of Indigenous Teachers for Two-Spirit Youth. We are marking the Day for Trans Visibility. And I think that something that Maddie really touched on there is how culture plays into all of this as well. We live in a country where this is legal, but there are other countries, other cultures where this is not, I don't know if legal is the right word, but it is certainly not accepted. How in your work at the university, I mean, both of you at the university, Blake being at Saskatoon Pride, how have you seen when it comes to newcomers, how is your work impacting newcomers, and are you seeing more people come into the community?
You're asking all the big questions today.
It's my job.
I want to say that absolutely we see people who come to Canada because they've been unable to be trans where they have begun their life. Mm-hmm. So folks who are refugees, who are asylum seekers, who then also have challenges around their initial documents in Canada. Maybe their permanent residency card needs to have a sex marker changed on it, needs to have their name changed on it. And I want to say we have some legal protections here, but it still doesn't make it easy. Mm-hmm. It still means there's processes and forms and fees. It still means that you have to change your name or sex marker with multiple government agencies and in multiple different locations. You don't get to just do it once and be done.
It's not like changing your address. There's no one-stop shop where you can just plug in your address and it changes for all
but
that.
I want to say it's bigger and more complicated than that. And sometimes I will joke about the trans tax and dealing with the government and how much time that takes. I will also say that we have folks who arrive in Canada and expect a greater welcome and a greater sense of affirmation and a sense of belonging, and who find that we are not fulfilling our promise in that regard. And so we need to be doing more and making more room and more space.
Blake, what would you say from Saskatoon Pride's perspective on that?
Yeah, I think Jay got into it pretty well. I think, definitely we should be working to be welcoming new folks. And that you're right, the processes around everything are generally kind of a nightmare. But I don't know if I have much to add on that.
No, that's fine.
Right?
That's totally fine.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Safe Cities designation in Saskatoon specifically. How do you feel about that? Not to ask you a loaded question.
I'm really trying to decide how I feel about that one still. that was an ask that I had made in November of 2023, so forever ago. And the wording was not safe, it was sanctuary. I was looking for Saskatoon to become a sanctuary city for 2S LGBTQIA plus individuals in light of Bill 137, in light of especially the 1 Million March for Children, and that violent rhetoric around that. And I guess also around like the rise of anti-trans legislation in the States. All of these sort of things, I was asking the city of Saskatoon to say, like for sure, definitely, they stand in line with trans and non-binary individuals and two-spirit individuals, and they will stand up for them when it comes to it and where they can. And then that was sort of the last I heard of it. And 2.5 weeks ago, I believe it was, I was back in council. The item was back on the agenda. I didn't find out it was back on the agenda until the day before, so that was a little bit frustrating. And it goes to show that trans and non-binary people are not being seen or heard, that it took them until the day before to bring up the item that I brought forward. And so Councillor Jasmine Parker for Ward 6 did put forward the motion of declaring Saskatoon an LGBTQIA plus sanctuary city. And Randy Donauer expressed concerns for over the sort of repercussions of using the word sanctuary politically, which I actually think would be good repercussions, like showing the Sask Party that this legislation is bad and that even the government of the largest city in the province is against it, is probably a good thing in the grand scheme of things. But he suggested we change the wording to safe. And then 2 weeks later, so just last week on Wednesday, we were back in council. I brought, I think, 9 individuals in with me, trans and non-binary individuals in with me, to speak against the wording of safe, because I don't think that safe is true by any means. And I think it's actually almost harmful to say that Saskatoon is a safe city and use that symbolically, whereas like sanctuary would be much more okay symbolically in my eyes. And the City Committee on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion spoke in favor of the motion, despite not having trans representation on that committee. And the city has gone forward with the motion. And so I do have a lot of feelings about it because like none of the trans people in the room were heard. And it's frustrating moving forward with it. But I will also say like Mayor Cynthia Block, Jasmine Parker from Ward 6, and Catherine McDonald from Ward 1 were all at our Trans Day of Visibility event that Saskatoon Pride held yesterday. So I am appreciative that they are, putting the steps in after making this declaration and like seeing community more.
Do either of you have thoughts on this?
Oh, I have thoughts. And I really hear the conflict in there and the challenges of working with government. My first thought is the kindest take I could have is that safe is aspirational, that Saskatoon wishes to be a safe city, and that an aspirational statement is a beginning, but it has to be backed up with actions. And so what is happening in terms of emergency housing for people, in terms of bathroom and change room access, in terms of ensuring access to medical care, in terms of ensuring housing is free from discrimination, like all in terms of employment and thinking about city employees and transition supports for them and training for other city employees. There are lots of actions that Saskatoon could take to back that up and make it a meaningful statement. And I think the symbolism has a politics to it. And Blake, I really hear your conflict there around those words. But it's an opening to then say, you've made this statement. How are you going to back it up? What are the actions you're taking to make this real?
More than words.
Absolutely.
More than thoughts and prayers, even?
Very much so, more than thoughts and prayers. People's trans people are actively getting harmed, two-spirit people are actively getting harmed, non-binary people are actively getting harmed. And we don't actually need nice words. We need actions, we need policy, we need tangible support, we need access to services, we need an end to discrimination. And that's just a short list. But there's lots of things the city of Saskatoon and also the city of Regina, let's look at where we live as well, could take to make the city more welcoming and safe for two-spirit, trans, and non-binary folk. And we need those things.
I wanted to talk to you about travel because particularly when it comes to traveling in the United States. I don't know what's on your passports. Frankly, it's none of my business. But it becomes the business of the border agents. Are the three of you willing to travel into the United States right now? Well,
No,
that's a no from
absolutely not.
Bridget. That's a
Yeah.
no from Blake. What about you?
I mean, this is a question complicated by having family that lives on both sides of the medicine line of the
no.
Canada-U.S. border.
Okay.
And so it doesn't feel like a question that I can just say no to because I have connections and people I care about deeply and love that I don't want to just abandon in this moment. I want to say that when Canada was discussing changing sex markers on passports, a number of us put forward the idea that we could just take sex markers off passports altogether. And that would offer non-binary folks an option that represented them and did not out them at border crossings. And that we previously put race and a racial identity on passwords. And we decided that that wasn't appropriate and forced people into boxes that didn't fit who they were. We stopped doing that. We could do the same for sex markers on our passports. And we didn't choose that way forward. So our government's decisions have enabled things to be less pleasant crossing into the U.S. What I'm hearing at this point is about U.S. citizens having passports revoked or sex markers that were on their original birth certificate put on those at the point of reissue. Not so much at the point of border crossings, but I will say that there's ongoing fear about what happens at border crossings and what happens if you are banned from going to the U.S. I would say it's not about travel to the States for vacation or for frivolous reasons at this point in time, and that I continue to receive ongoing asks from trans and non-binary folks in the U.S. about how to support them coming to Canada. What does it look like to live somewhere that they could access healthcare or access hormones or have human rights protection in terms of their employment? And so far, we have not made big moves to make that possible for people.
Okay. I want to leave us, we're coming up on the end of the show. I want to leave us in a happy place. I want to,
Can I make a shout out?
Yes.
Just to get us started on a happy place?
Yes, please.
So earlier in the show, I said my coming out at the age of 12 didn't go well. Well, I want to make a shout out to my father, whose birthday is on the 5th of April, because he was one of the people for whom it did not go well. And since then, he has come around. I never thought growing up and into my mid-20s even, I never thought that I would have contact with him. And now he is one of my favorite people.
Oh, great.
And there is an adage about old dogs and new tricks, and I will tell you folks, it is completely untrue.
You can teach an old dog new
You,
tricks.
you do not have to forgive your abuser, but you can. You don't have to, but you can. And sometimes that's the best thing for everyone.
So we spend a lot of time in June celebrating Pride. There's a lot of joy in Pride, but you can't just have joy 1 month a year. So I would love to know how each of you makes space for joy as a trans person, and you really only have like a minute each. Because we had a pretty serious conversation. Jay, go first.
I spent my morning coding research interviews by parents of trans and two-spirit young people who talk about how advocating for their young people has brought them closer with their young people, creates greater safety for their young people, brings them joy, helps them be more connected to their community, teaches them more about themselves. And so that's joy that I want to celebrate and name and be present in. and lots of the work of community care and building coalitions around creating services we need. And so also shout out to folks working on the coalition to repeal Bill 137 and that ongoing work in Regina with community members and teachers here.
Okay. Joy for Bridget.
I like to spend time with the people I love. I think that creates a lot of good laughter and a lot of good faith. I am currently the executive director of a safe space lounge on a campus, and so people come in, students come in, and what gives me joy is to help them feel safe and like they're accepted in a space, no ifs, ands, or buts, and to make their day better.
Okay. Blake. Joy for Blake.
Yeah, any time spent in community is joy for me. I'm also a drag performer.
Yay!
And so drag shows and being around my drag performer friends is one of my favorite things. And with that, it makes me think of the Dan Savage quote from the AIDS crisis of, we buried our friends in the morning, we protested in the afternoon, and we danced all night. The dance kept us in the fight because it was the dance we were fighting for. Really encapsulates, I think, the reason that I do the work, and the dance is always gonna keep me going in it.
Can you say is your drag name appropriate enough
It
that you
is.
can?
It's Ford Ranger, like the truck.
Okay. I was going to ask you your drag name, and I was like, this might not be radio appropriate.
It is a radio appropriate one.
When are you performing next?
Oh, good question. I just did 2 shows yesterday, and so now I'm forgetting when I'm performing next.
I feel like you can't go to a drag show and not have joy, so that's why I asked.
I'm not 100% sure when I'm performing next, but you could follow me on Instagram. And then
what's
you'll
your
find it.
Instagram handle?
It's just Ford.Ranger, but Ranger is spelled with a J.
Okay. Well, thank you to Maddie Enns who popped on the call. Thank you, Jay, Bridget, Blake. I know that this is a vulnerable moment. I know that this is a visible moment, but I think that you gave people listening a lot to think about and a lot to understand when it comes to thinking about who you are as a person. Not everybody really has to think about who they are. I think some people probably should think more about who they are, but I appreciate all of you so much sharing your stories with us and everyone listening, and I hope that you have a lovely rest of your day and you can be as visible or as invisible as you choose.
Thank you. Thank you for thoughtful
Thanks
questions.
for having us.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks so much for coming.